Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, September 16th, 19? Yes, sometimes it feels like 2018. The story today, more or less 2018 all over again. Daily Kos Radio is live now, in case you didn't know. I thought I might tell you, or I thought I might let Bill tell you anyway. Over the weekend, the president spent his 300th day, an excellent point, 300th day at a Trump resort. So, Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman. I'm in the show? Okay, well, I say we all get a free River of Blood snow globe. Yes, it's true. I'll be mailing those out to you shortly. That is not true. That whole thing is a lie. Anyway, here's what we're talking about. First of all, by the way, for those of you who don't remember the River of Blood reference, the River of Blood is the fake historical plaque marker that Trump had installed at his Virginia golf course, purporting, we'll use that word a lot in the coming days, purporting to be marking the spot of a bloody, because all the best ones are bloody, Civil War battle that took place on the property where the Trump golf course now stands. There was no such battle. Certainly no one ever called it the River of Blood. It wasn't nearby, and they're approximating the site. It's just that there wasn't such a battle. Trump just thought that it added cachet to the property if he claimed that there was, and he had a big giant flagpole. They may already have had the flagpole there. I don't know whether they installed it, but they made sure to put in the historical marker and make up a fake history. Just one of several things that he has faked during his presidency and continued to fake during his presidency. So, it's worth bringing up, especially considering what else is in today's news. I didn't know which direction to go today. Most of the weekend, I think, was consumed by the resurfacing of, charges and now corroboration for those charges against Brett Kavanaugh, now, of course, occupying a lifetime appointment on the federal bench. But he was occupying a lifetime appointment on the federal bench even before he was confirmed to the Supreme Court. We should be clear about that. And, that's what you'll find on the front page of Daily Kos right now at the moment, I believe, unless it having rolled over to the 9 o'clock hour, we've changed things out. But at the moment, Laura Clausen leads things off with her recap of what's going on. And as I mentioned to you, it's all right in the headline. 2019 replays some of the worst of 2018 with new Kavanaugh sexual assault revelations. I don't think we're talking about any new victims coming forward at the moment, but of course, I'm sure you would have heard it by now. But just to be up to date entirely and to be sure we're all on the same page, it was very interesting just how everything was treated. Of course, New York Times delivered the news to most of us, but of course, you may have noticed that they delivered it in the opinion section, and that is because I guess this is a growing phenomenon in the newspapers these days. Reporters following up on some of the allegations and eyewitness reports from people who were at Yale with Brett Kavanaugh in the early to mid 80s. We heard about their reports back in the at the time when he was going through his confirmation process. And of course, this is the way they decided to sweep things under the rug, was to say, all right, well, we'll hold an FBI investigation. We'll have the FBI investigate these new corroborations, including some new allegations against him. And everyone sort of felt at the time, well, all people who weren't Republicans and interested in installing Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court felt at the time that the investigation was, let's say, something of a sham, or a complete sham, is really probably what most people said. It now has been borne out, and the reporters who followed up on the witnesses who had offered testimony regarding Kavanaugh's behavior were interviewed by these reporters. Now, their product didn't get run in the New York Times in their newspaper under the hard news section. No, they had to go outside of the newspaper and write a book on the subject and write the book on their findings. And then the New York Times found it newsworthy to cover the publication of their book. This is a workaround that I've seen used several times. Washington Post writers, New York Times writers, I don't know whether it's any kind of a formal arrangement that they have, or it's a standard play, it certainly seems, inside the newsrooms. And I don't know whether it's a thing like, well, our lawyers will kill us if we run this in the newspaper section, or even continue to investigate this under the auspices of the news section. But you can investigate it outside, and we'll even, give you leave for publication and for additional work at the end and any book tour, and we'll promote the book, and we'll give you space in the opinion section to spill the beans about what's in the book and run teasers and boost sales. I don't know whether they have a cut of the publishing or anything like that, but I've seen this happen a number of times with big blockbuster stories. So they ran this play this time, and it was quite interesting to watch it play out this way. So story is that most, if not all, of the people who claimed to have something to add to the picture as witnesses, either character or I guess anti-character witnesses to Kavanaugh's behavior or eyewitnesses to the incidents themselves, who were at Yale at the same time, offered themselves up to the FBI, even voluntarily called the FBI to try and tell their story, and were never interviewed. And so the information that they had has filtered out into the public through this book, and to the rest of us who aren't just simply reading every book that's published, through the newspaper, reporting on the fact that this thing was being published. So it's been quite a couple of days, and all the old allegations and partisan fighting about it are renewed, and the lines being drawn in all of the ugliest possible ways, which basically breaks down to, oh my God, someone was sexually assaulted on one side, and yes, but I'm a Republican and I'm getting something out of this on the other side. And it's not even, doesn't even really break down as Democrat Republican entirely, although, certainly in political circles it appears to be that way. But there's gonna be some polling interest in this, I think, among the women, and it doesn't typically. I mean, the Republican women, Trump Republican women, appear to be just, they're not listening. And neither are the Republican men, of course. They never were. But in case you were wondering, well, might this break through with women? I suppose there are going to be a few. Greg would know more about exactly how many of them than I would. But that seems to have been the big story up until the very end of our, I guess, weekend cycle, when on Sunday night we found out that Mr. Bonesaw has become the commander-in-chief of the U.S. Armed Forces, or at least potentially so. The attack in Saudi Arabia against their oil depot, thought by most people, including the people who apparently perpetrated the attack, to have been carried out by the Houthi rebels, if you will, in Yemen, against whom the Saudis and everybody else under their sway have been fighting a war for several years. But a better story from the United States Republicans' perspective is if this could be pinned on Iran. So that's the story. And then Trump tweeted out last night, just in case anybody had any doubts, if the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia decides that it was Iran and is angry about it and would like the United States Armed Forces to take care of it, we stand ready to do his bidding. So that's fantastic, and must be a great feeling serving your country under those circumstances. But I don't know about that for sure. We'd have to ask some people. Maybe they'll get around to polling that. In the meantime, let's see what we do have. Good morning, Greg. How are you? I bet you know about this. Hi.
So we'll talk about the Kavanaugh. We'll talk about just to mention and finish up on what you were just saying. Part of the deal there, of course, is that with oil capacity being hurt by the attack, price of oil's gone up about 19%, and therefore you can expect gas prices to go up.
Yes.
And
Turn off
effects,
the TV.
their
There's
ripple
no
effects
gas.
on the economy and politics remain to be seen on that. So there's a lot of different reasons to follow that. And of course, there's an Israeli election. So there's a whole lot going on, a lot of moving parts, probably more to say about it by Wednesday. On the other hand, the irony of having Uber hawk John Bolton get kicked out of the administration right before Trump starts saber rattling on Iran is pretty interesting.
Yeah, no fair. That's what I was waiting for. Why couldn't this happen?
Exactly. I was here for this, and oh my gosh, you kicked me out right at the last minute.
Should have shaved, man.
And in fact, part of the leaks about what really happened, nobody really knows because you don't know who's leaking it. An unnamed source might be Bolton, an unnamed source might be Trump. But the story circulating right before the attack on the Saudi oil fields is that Bolton got the boot because he didn't like the idea that Trump was suggesting paying a ton of money to go back to the Obama deal. That is to say that Trump was going to free up billions and give it to Iran so that they would sign on for the very same deal that he said was terrible and started to put sanctions on them for.
Yeah.
So, in other words, Obama did it. It's terrible. My basic philosophy is whatever Obama did, I'm going to do the opposite, even though that's not working. So when it doesn't work, I'll pay the Iranians a lot of money to go back to the Obama deal, except I'll call it the Trump deal, and nobody will notice. I mean, that's basically what his foreign policy was in Iran. And Bolton objected to that because he wanted to attack Iran. And so Trump fired him. And then this happens, and Trump says, no, we're going to have to attack Iran. And Bolton said, wait, what? What's going on here?
I've been waiting. It's really not fair. It's like, walking out on a restaurant while you're waiting for a table only to have your name called once you get in the car. But okay, it's a slightly bigger deal than that. But for him, it's routine, you see. It's pretty amazing. The timing couldn't be better / worse / doesn't really matter because there's no good time to be doing this. But it's pretty amazing.
Anyway, but that's a story obviously to play out.
Yes.
What happened with the Times is pretty fascinating.
Yes.
I don't know if we have to spend a ton of time on it.
You have to spend all the time.
But hang on one sec.
Oh, all right. Why not? It's John Bolton. Good morning. I wish we did. Can I do a John Bolton? Does anyone know what John Bolton sounds like? I can't even pretend to do a John Bolton. But that would be the opportunity was there. All right.
So
yes.
What happened with Kavanaugh in the New York Times is that there was a book that was written by these two reporters.
Yes.
And what was published was a book excerpt. And that was already a little weird and odd in terms of how that developed.
Yeah.
Okay. And part of the reason is that the excerpt that they chose to do, which was not in the news section, was really a description of Yale culture and what it was like on campus at that time, with really odd details that had to do with investigating the Kavanaugh thing, sure, but the idea that one of his accusers, Debbie Ramirez, was poorly treated by the elite at Yale was really part of the story.
Yes. I mean,
for example,
makes an
they
story.
had the detail that, she was made fun of because she had an above-ground pool.
Yes. Well, how horrible. I mean.
Well, but, the idea was
around.
that she was treated differently, and so that she would have been molested, assaulted, however you want to describe it, by Kavanaugh, is in the context of his elite word against hers.
Yes.
So that's part of the deal. And so the Kavanaugh defenders, usual suspects, started attacking it in terms of, oh, my goodness, look at this. Somebody who went to an elite school like Yale is now being considered to be somehow not elite.
Yes, underprivileged.
But that's how the story was written, and that's how the excerpt of the book read with the responses. And then, oh, by the way, there's something in here that's news.
Yeah, right. That was an interesting thing. Well, it was this terrible scene at Yale, and they really treated their underprivileged kids who managed to get into Yale very badly. So there's really no way up the ladder. even for
Well,
high
but the whole
achieving poor
response,
kids.
the way it was
For
put
instance,
in and the response to it kind of developed
yes.
over the weekend. The next thing that happened is that the Times, in its infinite wisdom, decided to put out some tweets.
I forgot about the tweets almost.
Right?
Yeah.
Hawking the story.
Yeah.
And they were offensive and they were obscene, but they basically said, everybody thought that this was kind of fun until, something happened here.
Till Debbie spoiled the party.
Till Debbie spoiled the party, exactly. And they were really offensive, so that they took the tweet down, and then they apologized for the tweet, and then they took the tweet apology down, and then just put up a statement saying, we shouldn't have done that.
We don't know what we're doing, is what I'm
we don't know
telling
what we're doing
now, is at
yeah.
this point. Yeah,
But that's not the New York Times, and that's not, Dean Beckett. That's some intern who, that's the last of their job, probably. Anyway, that was a distraction. And then people actually got to the details in the story, and only, then did we start focusing on that. And the excerpt reads, while we found Dr. Ford's allegations credible during a 10-month investigation, that in and of itself is news,
yes,
Ms. Ramirez's story could be more fully corroborated. During a Senate testimony, Mr. Kavanaugh said that if the incident Ms. Ramirez described had occurred, it would have been the talk of the campus. Our reporting suggests it was. At least 7 people, including Ms. Ramirez's mother, heard about the Yale incident long before Mr. Kavanaugh was a federal judge. 2 of the people were classmates who learned of it just days after the party occurred, suggesting it was discussed among students at the time. So corroboration of the story by people who heard it contemporaneous prior to it surfacing as far as his being a Supreme Court nominee, where the general public heard about it. Yeah. And that's important. But wait, there's more.
Oh.
Enough to discuss about that, because many people think that's the credible charge here, that Ramirez's story is corroborated. But then it says, we also uncovered a previously unreported story about Mr. Kavanaugh in his freshman year that echoes Ms. Ramirez's allegation. A classmate, Max Steyer, saw Mr. Kavanaugh with his pants down at a different drunken dorm party where friends pushed his penis into the hand of a female student. Mr. Steyer, who runs a nonprofit in Washington, notified senators and the FBI about this account, but the FBI did not investigate. Mr. Steyer has declined to discuss it publicly. We corroborated the story with 2 officials who have communicated with Mr. Steyer. So this corroboration that Steyer says he saw this, he says he was an eyewitness, but the female student denies remembering it. They left that out of the story, and then they had to add it as an addendum. So naturally, Clip Magazine, now you're not qualified to talk about it. Right. The fact that the Times didn't mention in their segment, in their excerpt, that the female student didn't remember and couldn't corroborate Mr. Steyer's story means you shouldn't pay attention to any of it.
Oh, yeah, right.
Now, Mr. Steyer actually is a very well-known Washington figure, respected on both sides.
Ooh, both sides.
So you have a credible eyewitness who says he saw this, but it's only one single eyewitness, whereas the Ramirez case is corroborated by multiple people, but who didn't see it.
Yes.
So, the Kavanaugh defenders are jumping on all of this and saying, as far as the new one goes, it was only one person and the lady doesn't remember it. And then as far as the old one goes, nobody actually saw it. So you're all a bunch of lying people who are just trying to destroy this man's credibility, yada, yada. Yes. The same stuff we heard the first time. But that's been the argument over the weekend. It isn't just that there are new allegations. It's that these allegations are evolving, and the discussion about it is evolving. And it went from, why are you talking about what you consider to be underprivileged people at Yale, to, oh my gosh, there's some corroboration of the Ramirez story. Oh my goodness, what did the New York Times do with those tweets and who's in charge? Oh my goodness, here's a new completely a fresh allegation with a credible witness. Oh my goodness, the way the New York Times reported it was a little bit misleading because they didn't say that the lady didn't remember it. And so take your pick. You can, you can attack and pick it to pieces, but it sure looks like the same things that people said about Kavanaugh appear to be corroborated.
Yes.
And defending it makes you look like you simply don't want to hear it. You got pencils in your ears, and you're going to yell and scream about the fact that you don't like your people being, you will call it character assassinated, and other people will call it being held accountable.
Yes.
You know what the truth probably is?
Yeah. But what do you think?
I mean, it would be imprudent and unfair not to speculate.
Sure.
We should. I think Kavanaugh did all of these things.
Yes, I think that.
As a young person, and then kind of privileged and basically as was said about Bill Maher, he's probably a dick. But then he grew up to be a little bit better and more responsible and has been reasonable in his behavior since that time. What do you do with that?
Yes.
And that's part of the complexity of growing up male in America. But the fact of the matter is, nothing that he did was acceptable.
Right.
Some of it borders on assault. And there's no way somebody with that kind of record ought to be on the Supreme Court.
Well, yeah, that does pose a problem, doesn't it? It poses a gigantic problem. And it is possible that in perhaps some other line of work, it might be something that you would say, well, inexcusable, but I don't know what we do with the fact that there's been, 30, 40 years of otherwise reasonable behavior, considering the position you're in here at Yo-Yo Industries or whatever. But on the Supreme Court, and as many people pointed out, the term opens with a sex discrimination case now going to be ruled on by a justice who has exhibited behavior that calls into question his ability to evaluate the plight of women as humans. It's difficult to imagine him doing very well with this, and particularly as riled up and rankled as he is at having been called out on this. He's also an openly vindictive person.
But then he goes and lies about it in front of Congress.
Right. I mean, that's
and so that's part of the problem. So you have somebody who is on the Supreme Court who's supposed to be upholding the rule of law. Yes. And one of the things, if you're really going to be a rule of law defender, is you ought not to be lying about what you did under oath.
Yes. Right. That poses another additional level of the problem. I mean, I think had he been honest about it, it would still be a problem. Why shouldn't I have complete and absolute confidence in you? You just lied about yourself, but I'm sure you wouldn't do that about something else. Right. This is my ruling because I think so because of points of law. Well, I'm not going to tell you which ones they are because I don't have them, but it doesn't matter, and I'm a liar, and so you're just going to have to sit there and accept it. Yes, the perjury on top of it all only makes it worse. And the style with which the perjury was pulled off also calls into question his judicial temperament and demeanor and fitness for the bench. One other aspect of all this that the book uncovered that we didn't really discuss just yet was the insufficiency, and that would be a very generous word, insufficiency of the so-called FBI investigation into his background. That the book reveals that there are some 25 witnesses whose names were provided to the FBI, some of whom actually called the FBI day in and day out to say, when can I tell my story? And none of them were interviewed. So
including the Steyer fellow, who's the new eyewitness.
Yeah. So then they sit there and they say, well, see, there's no corroboration for Steyer's story, and so therefore it needs to be dismissed. And it may very well be that one or all of the 25 people not interviewed are that corroboration. We'll, at least from the FBI's perspective, never know. Someone else may find out. But again, as you said, it makes the defenders look ridiculous because it puts the defenders in the position of saying, well, all right, as to the first allegation of sexual assault, we have this excuse. Now, as to the second allegation of his sexual assault as a young man, I say that you're wrong about the details. Now, moving on to the third allegation of sexual assault, I think, so at what point did you say,
not only that, and as
fire.
Far as the FBI investigation of all of these things, which we decided was dispositive, it turns out that was completely incomplete. Well, here's my excuse for that. I mean, and by the way, what you're really doing, so when all of that fails and they look like, hyper partisans for doing this, then they fall into the hyper partisan thing. And by the way, you guys shouldn't be pursuing this because all that's doing is riling us up and uniting us behind this guy Kavanaugh, which we never would have done if you liberals hadn't really attacked him.
Yes, you're making us
because
Nazis
Robert
again.
Bork and everything since then, and that's how we roll.
Yes. Oh, by the way, I want to answer also another of your other points that I guess you're having brought up the perjury, or at least let's say the alleged perjury, before the Judiciary Committee. That sort of puts a capstone on the he's been reasonable since story, because I mean he was literally spitting mad. Right. Which is the person you're responsible for, by the way, in terms of personal responsibility. And so, he's been reasonable since then. He comports himself as a professional, except when he gets to his confirmation hearing in front of the United States Senate, at which point he's practically spitting on people and, hurling himself bodily over the desk to attack people. You never saw anybody so indignant. And look how insistent, as I was tweeting over the weekend, look how insistently he's lying. He's, how he's making his point. You're absolutely wrong about this. This never happened. And he's so indignant. And it turns out that with a little investigation, where you had prevented one earlier, we were kind of right. Well,
so that's basically how all of this played out.
Yeah.
But I am going to take that point about, there's this excuse, that excuse, this other excuse, and then if you want to change the subject, there's these 5 other excuses. Mm-hmm. But in the end, it's all going to be good for us because you liberals are really pushing this too far.
Yeah.
And look at you. This is what happened in 2018, and this is how you lost.
Yeah.
And I'm scratching my head and saying, actually, we didn't really lose in 2018. Oh, yeah, you did. You lost the Senate. Well, you're saying Heidi Heitkamp's defeat was basically because she voted against Kavanaugh? That was somebody who was destined to defeat and was trailing up until the point she took that vote.
Yes.
So we're going to come back to that theme because it's a common theme among conservatives and Republicans.
All right. Well, we'll have to come back to that theme. There's so much material available to us on it. And all right, so go ahead and maybe you can sell some Kavanaugh-branded plastic straws on the Trump website. See if it unites us. Once again, you yammering liberals are forcing us to become Nazis. I really hate it. So, all right, we'll be back in 2 minutes with, more of the same. Oh, no. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Edwards Radio. And we continue with the stunning news over the weekend that, Brett Kavanaugh is pretty much what we thought he was, but for several different reasons. Not the only thing in the news, of course, and things continue to pop up. I'm putting away new stories here as we speak. Greg filing a few as well. All right, where do we want to pick up from here?
So let's go back to North Carolina 9 and then make some points from the specific to the general about the reign of Donald Trump.
Okay.
All right. And G. Elliott Morris has a newsletter that I subscribe to, so this is a paywall thing.
Okay.
But last week we spent quite a bit of time following and then analyzing on Wednesday and Thursday what actually happened in North Carolina 9. And he's got a follow-up newsletter on that, which I think pretty much corroborates a lot of the stuff we were talking about. What it's entitled is What We Learned from the Special Election in North Carolina 9th Congressional District. And the takeaway there is that Democrats came close to winning, but there's more than 30 GOP-held districts that are potentially more competitive than that, though the number's less when you factor in incumbency and other things. The district is a microcosm of trends from 2016 to 2018, and Donald Trump's reelection strategy contains a hidden danger for Trump.
Yes. Good.
Which is kind of interesting.
Stairs.
So what we actually now have numbers on is that when you look at the individual counties, Mecklenburg, which has suburbs and the kind of suburban voters that Democrats were able to mobilize in 2018, and I won't say won over, because the whole Rachel Bittkoffer theme is that when you have new people coming out in large numbers, they're not necessarily the same people.
Yes, right.
You can have your Republican voters not convinced to vote Democrat, but then get independents who are left-leaning come out and overwhelm them with Democratic voters. And so it's not that the Republican voters changed their mind. It's that everybody else came out and overwhelmed them in numbers. And that's how 2018 was won, although there were some switchers. Nonetheless, Mecklenburg is a good example of that, and it turns out that Dan Bishop did less well in that particular area, that suburban-style area, than the Republicans did in 2018. But it turned out Dan Bishop, the Republican who won, did much better in the rural areas.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so two things to learn from that. Why did he do better in the rural areas, especially Robeson County, where the Lumbee tribe is, black voters and white voters are one-third, one-third, one-third. Why did he do so much better? That's the place that he did the most improvement with. But also, Cumberland, where Fayetteville is, also has suburbs. And I think includes Camp Lejeune, if I'm not mistaken. So you could think of it as a somewhat conservative trending area there. Nonetheless, that's also where Trump had his rally the day before.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. And Bishop did worse there than he did in 2018.
Oh, that's different.
So two separate things to discuss there to add on to what we talked about last week. All right. One is the idea here that the Lumbee tribe wound up voting Republican, which was kind of a surprise to everybody. And one of the reasons why Dan Bishop won is because he did so well in Robeson County. But I'm talking to people in North Carolina between last week when we did the show and now, and they're telling me that anecdotally, the Lumbee tribe is often votes Democrat, but very socially conservative.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So a group of voters, not unlike Latinx voters, who you might win over on issues, but lose on social issues.
I see. Yes, that's been a theory.
So the idea that Dan Bishop would sponsor a bill recognizing the tribe, plus throw extra money at them, plus having a registration drive, plus having a voter group who is primed to possibly vote Republican, turned out to be a perfect storm for Dan McCready, which suggests that Bishop did his homework in that area and McCready didn't.
Yeah, or, with all the investigation,
and that may be why Robeson
the story's
swung.
different. Could be. That's the explanation that's the least illegal, let's say, and the one we hope actually, I'd rather hope that happens.
Yeah, if there's mistrust about a North Carolina election, we know where that's from.
Just saying.
And perhaps the more interesting piece here, in looking at the fact that Fayetteville, Cumberland, wound up swinging toward McCready, despite the fact that Trump was there.
Mm-hmm.
G. Elliott Morris writes, the combination of increased turnout and a hard swing left might suggest that not only did Donald Trump's rally fail to win over extra net voters in the district, but it might have been counterproductive. It may actually have juiced turnout among Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents.
Where's that story? How come not? Why don't we say, you keep having those rallies, but that's just galvanizing Democrats,
Well, again, that's what
one.
Rachel Bittkoffer's been saying.
Yeah. Well,
if that's true, then his 2020 campaign, which appears to be focused on holding rowdy mega rallies around the country, might not be doing the president any favors.
Cool.
Of course, we would need evidence from more than one county and one congressional district to say this is the case. But luckily for us, political scientists Andrew Ballard, Hans Hassel, and Michael Hazeltine have come up with a similar answer. And they have a paper which actually writes that. And they conclude their paper as such. President Trump's endorsements may therefore be doing little to elicit engagement from voters on the Republican side. In other words, they're already juiced. You're not getting more.
Okay.
Whilst creating a rallying effect around opposing candidates and increasing engagement among Democratic voters. I'll just give you that paper so that when you do the summary,
at least we have
you
one.
could have it. The story then from these findings, says the paper, may be one of presidential backlash rather than presidential coattails. And therefore, G. Elliott Morris concludes Trump's rallies probably hurt, not help his electoral prospects, and that's a heck of a finding.
Yes.
So, to sum up the lessons, Republicans are playing defense again for the 2020 congressional elections and maybe the presidential contest too. They're still suffering a harsh bloodletting in suburban areas of the country. Suburbanites are engaged and seemingly increasingly anti-Trump. And though North Carolina 9 is only one datum, and the story in Charlotte may not be the story everywhere, but that seems to be the case in terms of how they did Mecklenburg. And then Trump's rallies seem to be hurting, not helping him as he continues the campaign across the country. Will he just continue to activate his opponents?
It's about time.
Right? So there's just some data to support the Bidikofer thesis.
Excellent.
That, you win by ginning up your base and recruiting people who are offended by the other side. Again, that's the reason for the persuasion part. It's to make it easier for those independents who otherwise might stay home to come out and vote for you. And so all of that is important. It's not because you're trying to convince the Trump voters. The Trump voters are not going to change. And in fact, they may even increase based on what he's doing. The job there is to try to increase yours. And by the way, she made some further observations over the weekend that one of the ways you do that is you tell a narrative and you make it important.
Just make it important?
Right? Well, take the Affordable Care Act.
All right.
Right?
Yes.
A technocratic discussion about the percentage of people who would be insured versus uninsured and whether or not individual states or areas may or may not save money is stupid.
Oh.
They called it death panels. You have to say, if you don't get this insurance, we're all going to die.
Oh.
That's how you make an argument. You have to appeal to the emotional side. The Republicans are really good at going to the extreme to make a point, and Democrats wind up with a technocratic answer, and they lose.
Well.
So if you're going to message about what's important. Climate change is important, and you have to consider stuff like the Green New Deal, or we're all going to burn.
Yeah.
The reason we're talking about Medicare for all is because when people who don't have insurance, are confronted with medical issues, and that's all of us, then we get thrown off for pre-existing conditions, and we're going to die. Make the more extreme argument, because that's how you convince people that you at least get their attention. Now, don't make it untrue the way they do. There were no such thing as death panels. But in terms of trying to convince a public that's not paying attention, you got to have a little pizzazz there to get their attention. And the technocratic arguments aren't going to do it. That's why issues don't win elections. Emotions do.
Well, unfortunately, they haven't convinced anyone yet inside of the Fortress Democrat just
right.
yet.
And so that's part of the message. And by the way, Democratic messaging really sucks, and here's why.
Yeah.
So that's part of that whole background there.
As I recall, the people who were inclined to use such messaging, though they may have been flawed otherwise, were also sort of ostracized. I remember the Democrats joining in the outrage about Alan Grayson calling out Republicans on their health care plan. Their health care plan is for you to die quickly.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
So
you got to get over that and get better at it. Now,
we can't possibly. Yeah.
How does all this play? The thing is that despite our best intentions and efforts, sometimes we win anyway. This is a bigger picture article, again by G. Elliott Morris. This one is not behind a paywall. And asks the simple question, could Donald Trump's presidency be creating a generation of Democrats?
Aha. Right. Backlash, not coattails. There you go.
Backlash, not coattails.
Have you seen him in coattails? By the way,
yeah, and that goes back to the whole conservative complaint that you liberals are just driving us to support Kavanaugh, and you're going to pay for it at the ballot box, just like you did in 2018 when you won.
You're turning us into socialists.
Yeah. So here's the main idea. Many Americans receive their political attitudes and the people who surround them. Researchers call this process political socialization. The greatest impact comes when you're young, when our minds are impressionable and we're open to new ideas. Like you and me, right? Maybe you had a
not so
teacher
much.
you admired who went with your mother or father to vote, or maybe you even talked politics with your peers, or maybe climate change scared the bejeebers out of you. There's a new poll that says 1 in 4 teenagers
Yes.
think climate change is incredibly important.
Yes. I didn't even know
In
teenagers
fact,
had bejeebers.
what's that?
I didn't know teenagers even had bejeebers, but when they did, and I guess they've been scared out of them. So.
Yeah, well,
Thanks.
that's a Biden thing to say because those of a certain age.
No
Most
vaccine
American
for
teens
that.
are frightened by climate change, and 1 in 4 are taking action, says a new Washington Post Kaiser poll. So those things that affect you when you're young wind up sticking with you. If you go back to, I don't know, 1980, 1984, the Reagan years, Reagan is president, conservatism is on the upswing, liberalism has been discredited, Mondale got clobbered. And so the people 35 years later who are in their 50s are one of the most conservative cohorts when you look at attitudes and how they vote and Trump support and all that stuff when you look at it by age.
Doe.
So what happens when you grow up, G. Elliott Morris suggests, when Obama is ascendant for 8 years and you get the positive Democratic feelings from that, and then Trump wins and you get the reverse polarization, negative ideas about what it means to be a Republican.
Yes.
So does that give you 12 years of politically socializing younger voters into being Democrats? And of course, if you take surveys of Gen Z and all that sort of stuff, it turns out that they're even more liberal than the cohort that came just before them.
Okay, so they are turning
Gen
us into
Z and
socialists.
millennials see bigger role for government, for example. Gen Z, 70% says should do more to solve problems. Millennials say 64. Gen X says 53. Boomers say 49, and silence says 39. So if you look at attitudes like that, the role of diversity, approving of Trump's job performance, Gen Z 30%, millennials 29, Gen X 38, boomers 43, silence 54.
Silence.
So the older you are, the more you like Trump, the younger you are. You don't think that. And of course, the younger boomers and older Gen X people are more conservative than the kids. Well, that the silence, in this reading, are the worst.
They are.
The silent generation that came before the boomers.
Is that what that is? Okay. They're the worst.
In terms of accepting Trump, but that's because they have the biggest trouble with diversity. Increasing racial ethnic diversity is good for society. Gen Z says 62% agree, millennials 61, Gen X 52, boomers 48, silence 42. So as somebody, and I don't know who made the quote, sounds like it should be famous, it's not that people are against change. It's that people are against changing for themselves.
That is interesting. Yeah, well, that's an interesting alternative theory. There's, and I wonder, I mean, for
the
longest...
You know the old psychiatrist joke, right? How many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb?
Tell me what you
think.
One,
but the light bulb has to be willing to change.
Okay. Psychiatrists I know just say, well, tell me what you think. It's terrible to trade riddles with them. But, you gain a lot of insight.
You do. You really do. Anyway.
This is an interesting alternative
the whole concept there is that you can congratulate yourself about how well you're doing and see I've run rings around the liberals logically and I've owned them with this tweet that my buddies think is great and nobody understands. But hey, I won. While in the meantime, you're chasing a whole generation away from your party and your way of thinking.
I guess so. And I don't think you'll find a lot of resonance for 500 forward email chains among the Gen Z either. Not too interesting.
No, it's more like, Dad, stop sending me these.
Right. But it used to sort of be the theory that, well, I don't really know why it is, but the older you get, the more conservative you get. That was just the general theory, but I like the idea of the socialization.
Things, right?
Yes.
If you're not a socialist by age 20, you don't have a heart. If you're not a conservative by age 40, you don't have a brain.
But I wonder whether that could similarly have been explained by looking back at who was prime minister at the time those different cohorts were being discussed by when they were growing up.
That's exactly my point.
Yeah,
People
that's amazing.
Attribute that to being older, but in fact of the matter is, it may just be who was president, prime minister, whatever, what was going on at the time that you grew up.
It's, it makes as much sense as more sense than just, old equals conservative. That can't be it. Because it's untrue for so many people. That's got to hold
or the one
true
that
for
we had
less
during the
than
Nixon
50%.
era, right? A conservative is a liberal who was mugged.
Yeah, right.
Because it was all about law and order at that time, which is how, Biden wound up with that crime bill that he's still explaining today.
Yes.
Times change, but in the process, you have to put things in perspective. And so let's turn a little bit in the remaining minutes to where we stand with the Democratic primary. And one piece that I think is of interest, because it's had a lot of discussion over the weekend as well, the concept, not the particular article, but this particular article is by Jeff Greenfield, The Ticking Time Bomb in Biden's Record Player Answer.
Record player. Okay.
Yeah. Biden referred to record players.
I only heard corn
the debate.
Man. Yeah.
And, of course, you'd have to remember what an 8-track and a record player is. But the idea was that poor people are disadvantaged because they don't get enough words. They don't have enough people reading to them. They don't have enough sound. And if you play records and speak language, then your development will improve. That was thought at the time, but it really hasn't been thought since. A lot of pedagogical books about how to teach had that incorporated in it, but newer research say it's really not quite the full story. Nonetheless, the question is, when Biden said it, was he being a little bit condescending to poor, read that as people of color, children, accusing their parents of not paying enough attention to them and white-splaining how to raise kids?
How to raise white kids, anyway. Okay.
Right? The subject turned to the matter of race and inequality, and moderator Lindsay Davis posed this question to Biden. In a conversation about how to deal with segregation in schools back in '75, you told the reporter, "I don't feel responsible for the sins of my father and grandfather. I feel responsible for what the situation is today, for the sins of my own generation, and I'll be damned if I feel responsible to pay for what happened 300 years ago." You said that some 40 years ago you said that. But as you stand here tonight, what responsibility do you think that Americans need to take to repair the legacy of slavery in our country?
Yes.
Biden listens to the questions, and he answered her this way. Well, they have to deal with, look, there's institutional segregation in this country. From the time I got involved, I started dealing with that, redlining banks, making sure we're in a position. Look, you talk about education. I propose is we take the very poor schools, triple the amount of money we spend, give every single teacher a raise. Number two, make sure that we bring in to help the teachers deal with the problems that come from home. The problems that come from home, we have one school psychologist for every 1,500 kids in America today. It's crazy. The teachers, I'm married to a teacher. My deceased wife is a teacher. I think he meant was. They have every problem coming to them. Oh, it's a gift. Now he's not qualified for being president.
Oh, yeah, right. You're
Make sure that every single child does, in fact, have 3, 4, and 5-year-olds go to school, not daycare, school. Social workers help parents deal with how to raise their children. It's not like they don't want to help. They don't know what to do. Play the radio. Make sure the television, make sure you have the record player on at night. Make sure that kids hear words. A kid coming from a very poor school, a poor background, will hear 4 million words fewer spoken by the time we get there.
I see.
So he mentioned record player. Does that make him too old? But that's not really the issue. Okay.
Yeah.
The issue is whether this analytical story suggesting that Biden is telling parents they don't raise their kids right and we know better, and is that part of what's going on here? Okay. Dave Rothkopf wrote, "This is an important and accurate threat. I don't believe Joe Biden is a bad person. I just think this once again reveals he's not of this era or suited to lead for nearly the decade ahead." And people said all sorts of stuff about what he really meant and the meaning thereof. In counterpoint, I think this Goldie Taylor thread from a couple of days ago is also incredibly important because every time something like this happens, it sparks a whole round of, oh, Joe Biden is finished commentary, which so far hasn't happened.
No.
And my version of it is to remind people that half the Democratic Party are moderates and conservatives. And so what progressives and liberals hone in on isn't necessarily important to the Democratic voter at large, especially the ones not paying attention. Goldie writes it differently. I think we misunderstand the extent to which African American voters, especially older black women who turned out for Obama, still buy into respectability politics. They're in Biden's camp, and his debate performance didn't deter them. Record players and social workers met them where they are. Those voters are more likely to be on Facebook paying homage to spankings, sharing family reunion photos, and celebrating 30 years at the post office than here on Twitter pushing pay equality and universal health care. Their worries are the same, but their answers are rooted in religious traditions and bootstrapping. Remember, these folks pushed the 90s era crime bill and they didn't get mad at Biden for it. So while we're hooping and hollering on here about out of touch Biden, I'm just reading what she's writing here. His campaign knows he ain't really talking to the progressives among us. He's talking to the centrist black voters who landed Obama in the White House. That's his base. Some of y'all newfangled pundits don't get that. You don't understand that there's more than one kind of black voter in the Democratic Party. And frankly, a good many of them still look at progressives with a side eye. It's unfortunate, but true. So crack that code, win the primary and the presidency, win back the Senate too while you're at it. So the point she's making is that the voters out there in the primaries aren't always the same voters who you see on Twitter. However, different states have different groups of people. Iowa Democrats tend to be more liberal than the Democratic Party writ large. And Iowa, coming first, plays a big role in determining who's electable and who's not. At the same time, that's the future. So you might argue that Biden's lead is fragile and other people can catch him, and that's probably true. But if you're looking at what's happening right now, and why do the polls say that Biden retains his lead, even though he keeps doing these things? Well, Goldie Taylor has a really nice explanation for that.
Yeah.
And it's that the voters out there are different than the voters, let's say, who listen to Kagro in the morning or who are on Twitter or who write at Daily Kos. They're just a different group of people. And they don't respond the same way, and that's why his lead has been, if fragile, up to this point, enduring. That's not predictive of what happens in the future. But it's those voters who have to criticize him, those voters who have to abandon him if he's going to lose.
Yes.
Not us. True. So, hearing what they have to say in some ways is more important than hearing what we have to say. But, then again, I've always been of the frame of mind that you'll learn more by listening than you do by talking.
That's, yes. Well, so always good advice. Well, it is.
That's why I don't let you talk. So I can
that's you know what? It's not working. I mean, this might be working for you. I haven't learned a damn thing.
It's working fine for me. I don't know. Just
Okay. Well, we're just different people, different cohorts. Sometimes listening isn't worth a damn. Some people just can't do it. Well,
a reminder that David and I have been having this one-way discussion for like 15 years.
It's very easy from this end, I can tell you. Anyway,
that takes you to the end of the hour, so you got like 3 minutes to sum up, and then you're on your own.
Okay, Trump bad. I guess that's about it. Well, I'm very interested in this political socialization deal, and that's been sticking in the back of my mind through this discussion, which is also interesting and also poses, it's the same problem, just written in a different way. Are you going, right now, the 2020 campaign is the one on your plate. Do you play it for where the living voters are now, or do you play for the future? And, for some of the other candidates, there's only going to be one nominee, and we don't know what the results are going to be. And all the polling says, honestly, take your pick. They all beat Trump at this point. We'll see whether it holds and whether he cheats and whether there is an election, all of that. But, what an interesting thought. But all the rest of them, there's going to be, I guess, for lack of a better term, 19 losers in this. But, a good number of them may very well be back next chance next time around for Democrats to run to hold a nominating contest, and those who built for the future, I assume, will be the ones to succeed if Biden is nominated and wins. The next generation finally takes over. It might not be unwise to play for them now, knowing that it may not net you the nomination, but perhaps we're in good shape no matter who wins the nomination in terms of finishing off Trump in 2020. We'll see. He's not the favorite. I learned that. How about that?
So there you have it.
Okay.
That'll, again, take us up to the hour, but I'll sign off now. So this has been a very interesting conversation, one way or otherwise. This is great working, speaking to my good friend David Waldman, Kagro in the morning, whose show it is. You'd never know that from my segment. And we'll be back. He'll be back for in 5 minutes, but I'll be back on Wednesday, and we'll see what else happens.
Yeah, okay. Fill your tank, I guess, unless you have an electric car, in which case I guess charge it and hang on tight and see whether we're at war by the time you come back. I don't know.
See you then.
Pretty crazy. Okay, thanks very much, Greg. Take care. Stay low if we do end up at war. And, wow. That's all I can tell you. John Bolton can't believe he's missing out on this. Okay, let's see. We do have our next break coming up in just about a minute. That'll only be 1 minute. Maybe we can tease what's coming up on the other side. I had something of a plan, but I see some more Kavanaugh news and observations breaking, plus some developments in the oh my God, Russia category as well. So we'll get to some of that, including the story I saw. I guess maybe we'll come back to the exclusive story as reported by Yahoo News. Russia carried out a stunning breach of FBI communications system, escalating the spy game on U.S. soil. That seems like something of a problem as well, heading into closely contested, let's say, election in which Donald Trump is in danger of losing, and perhaps by a considerable margin. And the Russians may or may not be willing to sit by and abide by that. They may have an active interest in keeping him in place, or they may be done with the guy. I'm not really sure how Russians think on this front, but we know they're going to want all the information they can get, and they're still working to get it, and we're doing nothing to prevent it. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Edwards Radio. Let's see, one last thing, a couple things that Greg sent my way before departing for the day. I just want to check in on this one. This one I have questions about. Zeke Miller tweet here, provided us a White House reporter for the AP. His tweet from the weekend, this is what he took away from the weekend. Beat reporters, they got to stay focused despite what happens elsewhere. Twitter is for discussing all the things that are outside of their beat that everyone else is talking about. From the weekend, Trump's plan to win the election, and that's actually phrased that way, win the election, even if he loses swing voters. And I don't know, I'm just looking at that side by side with the Russia carried out a stunning breach of FBI communications. And I'm wondering, does he mean actually win the election or convince people that he won the election even if he didn't win the election, or what? So I don't know. Let me start with that more traditional, perhaps, story, even though it means I have to look at people wearing Trump gear. Zeke is not the only reporter on this piece. Sarah Burnett and Alan Fram joined him in this from Saturday. Don't vote? Question mark. It's not a command. Don't vote. You should vote. Don't vote? Question mark. The Trump campaign would like a word with you. And let's see what they're getting at here. This is datelined from Fayetteville. Does this have to do then with the most recent rally as well? The 28-year-old Marine from, I'm sorry, I missed the introductory line. Ashley Arentz is a political unicorn. What does that mean? It means the 28-year-old Marine from Jacksonville, North Carolina, didn't vote in 2016. She was eligible, but 28, so 24, 25 years old, didn't vote, and she wasn't even registered to vote in the state. But there she was on Monday, standing in line for hours in the 90-degree heat, waiting to hear President enter President Donald Trump's rally in Fayetteville. That made her a golden target for the volunteers in Dayglow yellow T-shirts working to register new voters. Arentz said she likes the president because he's, quote, just being straightforward, which is amazing that this is now a registered voter and also, by the way, supposedly defending our freedoms is. But okay. She filled out a registration form on the spot, which, that is interesting. I mean, there's as many reasons for joining, for enlisting in military service as there are people who do it, I suppose. I feel like they should have higher registration numbers. But then again, they feel like I'm sure they think of voting as perhaps the second most important demonstration of patriotism that they could possibly make, and that they're already making the first one. That kind of makes a certain amount of sense. But yeah, to me, I'd feel like, well, if I'm doing this, then I really I'm going to be big on civic duty all over the place. But that sounds weird, doesn't it? But then again, their duty isn't civic per se; it's military. So I don't know. It's just a weird thing that you would say, I'll enlist. You have to fill out paperwork, and it's pretty much the same paperwork to start with, I would think. You put down name and address on this one. Why don't you do it in triplicate, and one of them is a voter registration form? Do they not do that? I mean, isn't it like you have automatic, or you are handed now with like motor voter? You can be handed a voter registration form when you apply for your license, but my recollection is that many of the same places also for 18-year-olds anyway, getting their licenses or doing whatever, or registering to vote, they'll also hand you the selective service registration card and say take care of both at once. I would think that military recruiting stations should have. Do they not have voter registration forms? That seems like such a mistake to me. Like, you have people at their most patriotic moment. You should be registering them to vote. Never thought about that. I mean, maybe they're there and the recruiters are just like, that's not my job. My job is to get them to sign this one. I don't care what they do with that one. And that's why it languishes and collects dust. Maybe they're doing a fantastic job registering people, but Ashley wasn't interested for whatever reason. Okay. Anyway, so this time though, online for the rally, she filled out a registration form on the spot. Less than 14 months before Election Day, the president's team is banking his re-election hopes on identifying and bringing to the polls hundreds of thousands of Trump supporters, such as Arentz, people in closely contested states who didn't vote in 2016. And there are a lot of them. I mean, recall that we just don't have good voter participation in this country, and we never have. And if you watched the recent Brexit movie that I caught on, HBO the other day, you would find that what's the name of the British strategist who ended up coordinating the Brexit campaign and who now works with Boris Johnson so closely? Is it Derek? Is his first name? Is that right? And I can't recall what his name has come up in the Brexit context so many times, and in the last couple of days as an advisor to Johnson. But in the movie, I'll tell you this: in the movie, he was played by Benedict Cumberbatch, right? So I could probably look it up that way. I can go to IMDb and look up the Brexit movie. Maybe I'll even do that. But it was explicitly his theory, and it seems like it was either shared closely or, purposefully swapped as between this guy and Steve Bannon. I have the feeling that it maybe originated elsewhere, and Bannon just seems like the kind of guy who gloms onto this stuff. But here we are. The Brexit movie with Benedict Cumberbatch playing. I can look for the cast now, and it's Dominic Cummings. That's right. I actually kind of did have that name in my head. Got the Dominic part. Dominic Cummings, though, in the movie at least, is clearly portrayed as a political consultant advising his Brexit team that the place to look for the votes to win the Brexit campaign is among people who haven't voted in years, that were so disaffected and felt so disconnected from everything that they were probably the ripest targets for something as cynical as the Brexit campaign. I mean, he didn't put it that way. He thought they were going to be true believers, I think. Or maybe he didn't even care. He just wanted to win the campaign. But he seemed very interested in exploiting their disaffectedness and their isolation. Not only would they likely, because of those things, be better inclined to this cynical ploy of Brexit, but he was excited about the prospect of catching the opposition entirely by surprise, by bringing out to the polls that portion of the electorate which has never been a part of it. Scientifically, Moneyball-wise, your consultants on the other side, here that would be the Democratic consultants, there, I guess, I don't know who I would lay it on, but certainly in that context, the Remain crowd, being run by establishment politicians who had learned from years of experience that there's a certain segment of the population which habitually doesn't come out to vote. And concentrating on them is a lost cause, a waste of time and energy and money. They're not coming out, and we don't want them to come out. They don't typically vote our way, and so your money and time is best spent ignoring them so that they feel ignored and stay ignored, and therefore stay out of the voting booth. And Cummings, I guess in an evil genius sort of way, was the guy, at least in the Brexit context, who figured out that these, they're exploitable. And if you go and visit them and make them feel special, like actually talk to them again for once, there's a big scene in which they do some canvassing, and he brings, I guess, a conservative Brexiteer member of parliament with him, and they're astonished. It's his constituency, but he comments as they drive up, are you sure we're in the right place? I've never been here in my life. And he's like, this is in your constituency. You don't come here because the polling, the data, the Moneyball numbers say you don't belong here. It's a waste of time to be here. They don't vote. And I guess it was Dominic's theory that, would they vote if you paid attention to them? Well, that's a good question. They might. And but anyway, he was particularly excited about being able to, ambush the Remainers by bringing out an army of people that they had either forgotten about entirely or had decided strategically to ignore because they weren't a danger. And I guess that's the unicorn here in this story. So now back to this story, before getting too sidetracked for too long. Where were we? 14 months before Election Day, President's team is banking his re-election hopes on identifying and bringing to the polls hundreds of thousands of Trump supporters, such as Aaron's, people in closely contested states who didn't vote in 2016. As political junkies, we can hardly believe that there are such people, except we know intellectually that there are, because voter turnout, voter participation, even in presidential elections, is astonishingly low. And it's a point we make all the time. But we don't discuss it very often in the context of, well, what do we do about that? And if we did bring them out, would they be on our side? Some of them would. In fact, I think the conventional wisdom is that the bulk of them would, because it's disproportionate as between, I think it's racially disproportionate among the non-participating electorate. And the demographics would suggest that Republicans would do anything to continue to suppress a certain portion of this non-participating voter-eligible population, let's say. Okay, so this is their plan, to bring out the white ones of those people. The campaign is betting that it may be easier to make voters out of these electoral rarities than to win over millions of Trump skeptics in the center of the electorate. And I guess if you're only getting 50% participation of eligible voters in an election, that's a real thing. Even though they've been telling us, and this is one of the dangers, I guess, of the way of polling methodologies, right? Greg has been making the point, and it's a valid one for the universe we're discussing, that Trump is increasingly unpopular, or that he just, the Trump base just doesn't represent the majority of voters. And that is true. The question the Trump campaign seems to be asking is, does Trump have sway with the majority of eligible voters, many of whom are discounted entirely in the polling? And the closer we get to the election, when people are really hyper-focused on things, the closer we get to the election, the more the polling tends to focus on the most likely voters, people who actually have voted. And a person who hasn't been registered until now would likely be screened out of the poll. Certainly towards the end of the election cycle, will be mostly screened out of the results. And so you'll end up with polls that say, among the people we talked to, it's looking terrible for Trump. He's going to get trounced, 60-40. But that may only be because we, only spoke to about 50% of the eligible voting pool, and that there's this other 50% who are getting screened out because they're highly unlikely voters because they've never voted before or never voted in their life or haven't voted in the last 10 years or whatever it is, who are now newly activated. And they'll tell you, if you ask them, or if you record their answers, or you count their answers because they're so unlikely as voters, that they're for Trump, but they might not come out in the final results because they get screened out by the likely voter screen. Anyway, again, back to the story here. It's a risky wager born of political necessity, the one Greg tells you about. It's politically necessary because leave things as they are and let the same 50% of eligible voters do the voting, and it won't come out well for you. Anyway, risky wager, born of political necessity, and helps explain Trump's provocative communications strategy, from his attacks on the media to his racially polarizing rhetoric. Trump, aides and allies say, knows he needs to fire up his supporters, and anger is a powerful motivator. This could be entirely true. I mean, what if you're a dedicated racist? I'm in the Klan. I hate I hate everybody but myself. I even hate my fellow Klan members. They're frankly not that nice. But as a result, I don't vote because I believe there's no place in the American political system for me, because there isn't. And Democrats and Republicans alike tell me that all the time. And there is no Klan party, and they won't let me have one. But what if one candidate for president is not embarrassed by this association and says, I'm your hate candidate? They'll never allow a Ku Klux Klan party. But look, I'm a Republican. Wink, wink. I'm a Klan guy. Vote for me. I'll do the Klan thing with you. And they say, all right. I mean, they're highly political in their thinking. I mean, it's racist and horrible, but they think it's a political philosophy. But they don't apply their political philosophy in American civic life because there isn't a party that they feel represents them. And no matter, here we have it on we see this on the ultra liberal side all the time, right? People who say that both parties are the same, man. There's not a dime's worth of difference between two of them. They're both warmongers and they're both war for oil parties. And they have some points and all of that. And we make fun of them by giving them that weird speech effect. But there are also people, to give another weird speech effect that's equally unfair, on the other side of things, who are ultra conservative. They're ultra reactionary anyway, and their affected speech is, both parties are the same, man. Neither one of them's racist enough for me. They both say we can't discriminate against the dark people. Whatever the hell they say. I'm sure they say much worse. I'm attempting to not say that. I think I can handle that. I don't have that problem walking around accidentally saying things like that. But, right. So I guess that's a plan, right? If you can wink to those people, it's disgusting. It's horrible, and it really does have no place in our society. But if there are thousands, millions even, of people floating around out there who have just been waiting for the right, the dog whistle doesn't do it. The right air horn. A Republican president who says, to hell with it. Yeah, whatever. I love Klan people. They're very fine people in this march full of disgusting people. That might do it. Okay. People trying to persuade swing voters are probably wasting their time because nearly all voters have already put their jersey on, said GOP strategist Chris Wilson. Trump needs to bring more of his fans onto the field. Tens of millions of Americans choose not to vote in federal races every 2 years. The president's campaign is determined to turn out the Trump supporters among them. It's actually kind of a hard thing to wrap your head around a little bit. Like, are you a Trump supporter if you haven't come out to vote for him? I mean, don't you kind of have to be a voter to be a Trump supporter? Well, not technically. I like Trump, but I don't care to do anything about it. Or we just lucked into it. Or I guess there's going to be people who say, well, I'm glad we lucked into it last time. And now I see that a true racist, bigoted idiot like myself can be elected. I'm newly inspired to get registered. I guess that's the thinking. So tens of millions choose not to vote, and they are eligible. It views them, that is the Trump campaign, views them as an untapped stash of Republican support that can help him overcome stubbornly low poll numbers and his difficulties in winning over voters in the shrinking political center. There's a new math spurred by a new candidate at the top of his ticket. Trump campaign senior political advisor Bill Stepien told reporters. And I think we need to throw out the old way we look at how elections are won and lost. This will make a great transition to the next story, I think, about the FBI communications. And I'll tell you why in a second. Although maybe I should make a note to myself or blurt it out now. Well, anyway, I'll continue with the story. I think we need to throw out the old way we look at how elections are won and lost. That's not to say reaching them or getting them to vote for Trump will be easy. The surest predictor for whether someone will vote in the future is whether that person has voted in the past. That's what I was talking about the voter screen. This political truism has long informed campaign strategies. Still, attempting to shape the electorate is nothing new. Barack Obama's campaign in 2012, not 8, shocked Republican opponents when it attracted Democrats who didn't vote in 2008. George W. Bush's campaign relied on the same tactic in 2004. But both campaigns tried to expand their bases while also focusing on trying to claim more voters in the center. The strategy was never one of simply looking at identifying red Republicans and getting them out to vote, said Karl Rove, Bush's strategist, even though that's what he told everybody it was, but maybe it was misdirection. It was also a campaign of addition and persuasion. Trump's gamble comes in de-emphasizing the persuasion game as it focuses on boosting turnout. The Trump campaign and the Republican National Committee have held events geared at reversing an erosion of support for the GOP among women and Latinos, but the central message of the campaign, as delivered by Trump, is its de facto chief strategist and spokesman, Trump himself that is targeted at those who already support him, but just haven't supported him necessarily with votes, I guess. At campaign rallies such as the one in North Carolina, the Trump campaign, the RNC, and an authorized super political action committee work the long lines outside to register voters. At a February rally in El Paso, Texas, the Trump campaign says 2/3 of registrants had voted in 2 or fewer of the previous 4 federal elections. Before a June rally in Orlando, a geo-targeted digital campaign by a Trump super PAC directed about 3,000 people to the state's voter registration website. We know from data gathered from rallies that a significant percentage of rally registrants and attendees have voted infrequently in federal elections, but they are motivated to come out to see President Trump, said Trump campaign communications director Tim Murtaugh. The key for Trump is to find the right non-voters, those who already support the president. Overall, those who don't vote tend to be younger, that's bad for Trump, non-white, bad for Trump, less educated, sometimes good for Trump, and more likely to vote for Democrats than those who regularly cast ballots, bad for Trump. But there is a sweet spot in there, right? A Pew Research Center analysis of survey data found that the composition of registered voters who did not vote in 2016 skewed Democratic versus Republican 55% to 41%. Trump's campaign has vast sums at its disposal, and maybe some more than we think might come from Russia. Who knows? And the GOP's trove of political and consumer data on all eligible voters in the country provides the pro-Trump effort a head start. The task is to identify likely Trump supporters in places such as Escambia County in Florida's Panhandle, where more than 75,000 eligible voters didn't cast ballots. Those would be, I guess, registered but didn't cast ballots. And those who voted for Trump voted for Trump by a 3-2 margin. Trump won the state by 112,000 votes. And then you know how our electoral college system works after that. In Michigan, which Trump carried by 11,000 votes, there is opportunity in places such as the GOP stronghold of Ottawa County west of Grand Rapids. As many as 50,000 eligible voters didn't cast ballots in 2016, according to an Associated Press analysis of voter data, and Trump won the county by a 2-1 margin. But if Trump's strategy is to pay off, his allies have a lot more work to do. Between 2016 and 2018, Michigan counties that backed Trump in 2016 added more than 44,000 people who were eligible to vote, but voter registrations increased by just 622 people. You see what's happening here? Between 2016 and 2018, Michigan counties that backed Trump added more than 44,000 people of age 18 or older, United States citizens, for whatever reason, appear in this county. They become of age, they move to the county, whatever it is. However, of those 44,000 people, just 622 of them have bothered to register to vote. So there's 43,388, or did I do the 78 people out there? Did the math on the fly and probably screwed it up. But 43,000 more people who are 18 and U.S. citizens who live in counties in Michigan that backed Trump, who are out there who haven't even bothered to register to vote and cannot cast a ballot for Trump. But if they could get to those people, they think that they'll be Trump voters by a 2-1 margin. That's what the stats would indicate. Trump can't turn out all the eligible voters, and there's no guarantee that those they do reach will vote for Trump or vote at all. I mean, people register all the time and then just don't vote, right? But the president's team is betting that bringing more voters in will pack more of a punch than converting the ballot-going faithful. You have a massive pool of people who are less participatory, and the more of those people you can engage in the election, the better your chances of victory are, said Brian Walsh of the Trump Super PAC America First Action. You're still going to try to move those swing voters, but how well you need to do is vastly different depending on how many people you bring in. If all goes according to plan, Walsh said, Trump could lose the whole swing vote, which is what we're saying, is in the offing here, and still win the election because a new cohort enters, which is, I guess, what Rachel Bidikoff is saying. The strategy makes some congressional Republicans wince, and that is because they have won and held power, just like the politician in the Brexit movie that accompanies the Derek Cummings character to his part of his own constituency. I've done very well ignoring these people who were very conservative, and might vote for me, but I just am not 100% certain that they might not vote for the British equivalent of a Ku Klux Klan candidate instead of me, so I leave them out. Very interesting. So that's why the strategy makes some congressional Republicans wince. They fear the emphasis on non-voters will further jeopardize Republican candidates, especially for Senate, who need centrists to win their competitive races. Yes, so it's something of a risk to run as a pure racist. In Michigan's St. Joseph County, heavily agricultural and reliably Republican region in southwest Michigan that Trump won in 2016, GOP Chair Rodney Chupp, C-H-U-P-P, is on the hunt for new recruits. We'll see how he's doing it and how well it's performing. As we continue with this article after this, I'll see if I can remember the extraneous point and make a note for myself for later. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Okay, just making those notes for myself so I can come back to this point later on and see if I can make the transition to the next article. Had a little weird music incident as I reached across the desk for note paper and hit the mouse that lowered the volume on the soundboard, but we'll see if we can't fix it in post, as they say in a totally different business from this one. Continuing on with the strategic look at bringing out new or unlikely voters as a way of saving Donald Trump, the same strategy we note that appears to have been employed to win the initial Brexit vote in the UK. We continue with this story. We were looking in Michigan's St. Joseph County, where the Republican chairman is executing this strategy of looking for new recruits. The 47-year-old insurance agent, our GOP chairman Rodney Chupp, predicted Trump will win back the support of some of the Christian conservatives who sat out the race last time, or who were among the roughly 1,000 people in the country to support a third-party candidate. People in our county are warmer toward Trump in a lot of ways because they are starting to see results they like, Chupp said. This is entirely possible. I think the message of, look at the results Trump is getting, and I mean, again, not results in the traditional sense, like, did I do the things I said I was going to do? Did I accomplish things? Is there a wall built? Did China surrender? Did I change what's happening in North Korea? Those aren't the results they're looking for. Those aren't of interest to them. It's, are you beating up on the minorities I hate? You are? Okay. Those are some results I like. So look at the results Trump is getting could motivate some folks. Terrible folks, but okay. The much tougher task will be turning out some of the 20,000 people who didn't make it to the polls in 2016 out of the county's nearly 45,000 eligible voters. So 45,000 people in St. Joseph County who are 18 and U.S. citizens. Of the 45,000, 20,000 didn't show. And that might be, I can't tell whether they're talking about, again, they have to be really careful about the terms here. It says eligible voters, but are we talking about they're eligible because they're 18 and U.S. citizens, or are they eligible in the sense that they are not only 18 and U.S. citizens, but are registered and therefore eligible to cast a ballot if they show up on election day at the polls without having done anything else? Will they get a regular ballot or a provisional ballot? Right? So it's hard to tell whether they're talking about people who are registered or people who aren't. Anyway, is it possible, they're positing here, to get even 1,000 of the 20,000 to turn out for Trump next fall? I don't know, Chupp said. I just don't know. But that'll be, of course, his mission. That's actually where the article ends here, which is just fine by me because I wanted to move on to, well, a very different article and a very different story, but I wonder whether we can't, I don't know, we'll read to see what this story has and see whether the bridge I'm thinking of makes any sense. And if it does, then this article will possibly inform that a little bit. I teased it before. Yahoo News' piece, an exclusive. Russia carried out a stunning, in scare quotes, breach of FBI communications system, escalating the spy game on U.S. soil. Zach Dorfman, Jenna McLaughlin, and Sean Naylor, the reporters for Yahoo News here on this piece. On December 29th, they tell us, 2016, the Obama administration announced that it was giving nearly 36 Russian diplomats just 72 hours to leave the United States. Remember all this? And was seizing 2 rural East Coast estates owned by the Russian government. As the Russians burned papers and scrambled to pack their bags, the Kremlin protested the treatment of its diplomats and denied that those compounds, sometimes known as the dachas, were anything more than vacation spots for their personnel. The Obama administration's public rationale for the expulsions and closures, the harshest U.S. diplomatic reprisals taken against Russia in several decades, was to retaliate for Russian meddling in the 2016 presidential election. But there was another critical and secret reason, or I guess we should just make the emphasis correct here. There was another critical and secret reason why those locations and diplomats were targeted. Both compounds, and at least some of the expelled diplomats, played key roles in a brazen Russian counterintelligence operation that stretched from the Bay Area to the heart of the nation's capital, according to former U.S. officials. The operation, which targeted FBI communications, hampered the Bureau's ability to track Russian spies on U.S. soil at a time of increasing tension with Moscow, forced the FBI and CIA to cease contact with some of their Russian assets, and prompted tighter security procedures at key U.S. national security facilities in the Washington area and elsewhere, according to former U.S. officials. It even raised concerns among some U.S. officials about a Russian mole within the U.S. intelligence community, though I imagine that's an everyday occurrence for them. It was a very broad effort to try and penetrate our most sensitive operations, said a former CIA official, and you expect that they would be trying to make such efforts, right? American officials discovered that the Russians had dramatically improved their ability to decrypt certain types of secure communications and had successfully tracked devices used by elite FBI surveillance teams. By the way, the article, as I'm reading it, has, they have the what to read next teaser stories, mostly not from Yahoo itself, but from other outside sources that pay for placement so that you'll click on there. And they have photos illustrating these things and, various approaches to get your eye here. But this part of the story is very interesting. Again, we're talking about American officials discovering that the Russians had dramatically improved their ability to decrypt certain types of secure communications and had successfully tracked devices used by elite FBI surveillance teams. Happens to fall right next to a read this next story about Edward Snowden, which is pretty interesting because, of course, it raises the possibility, and I know I am not a keen follower of the Edward Snowden story, and I don't know what's up with the guy. And I feel like there were some things that he did, clearly there are things that he did that say the U.S. government feels were counterproductive at best, and which I yet feel like, there were some things that the United States government was up to with respect to surveillance powers that I don't think it was properly entitled to, or that I had some questions about, and I'm glad Edward Snowden raised those questions. On the other hand, there are questions raised by, I didn't ask these questions. was a different time way back then. I didn't ask quite the same questions, although I did ask some questions when Snowden fled to Russia. I mean, I understood why he fled. He was going to go to jail. That's not fun for anyone. But he fled and did so in such a way, and landing in Russia. At the time, I thought, well, I guess that's the kind of place where you would land, where even then, even before we knew about their troll farms, it would be the sort of thing that the Russians might do to troll the United States just in an antagonistic way, to give shelter to someone who had done damage to American national security was kind of a no-brainer for Russia at the time. But it wasn't entirely clear just how aggressively Russia was waging, and not to me anyway, waging their information warfare against the United States. And having an information warrior from the United States essentially defect to Russia and become dependent on the Russian regime for his protection from the United States and from punishment for what the United States government considered massive national security violations and criminal efforts. Well, the price for that was possibly, I mean, I don't think it's very likely that someone as opportunistic and authoritarian as Vladimir Putin just simply says, well, the right thing to do here is simply to offer Edward Snowden asylum and then just leave him alone. I imagine that they continue to exploit his expertise in various ways, some of which may have been given willingly and some of which may not have been given willingly. But the fact that American officials suddenly discovered that Russians have dramatically improved their ability to decrypt certain secure communications and track certain elite surveillance devices, some of which I assume, if not all of which, were known to Edward Snowden, makes me wonder whether that might not be at least partially the source for some of this new ability. Whether that information was given willingly or not, I don't know. Officials also feared that the Russians may have devised other ways to monitor U.S. intelligence communications, including hacking into computers not connected to the internet. Senior FBI and CIA officials briefed congressional leaders on these issues as part of a wide-ranging examination on Capitol Hill of U.S. counterintelligence vulnerabilities. A problem with that I've discussed in the show before is that possibly half of those you are briefing are pro-Russian. And some of them may just outright be essentially Russian assets. Out of the gang of 8 who are routinely given access to the most classified information shared with Congress, several of them are implicated in ways that make us think they are working directly for the Russians. And some of them are implicated in ways that make us think it's certainly to their partisan Republican advantage to cooperate with a Russian agenda, because not necessarily because they're pro-Russian, except insofar as Russians help their ability to win as Republicans, but because it's a matter of self-interest. Moscow Mitch is who we're talking about here. And apparently, I did see the other day that they're not allowing, is it true? They're not allowing that hashtag on Twitter anymore. I don't know what they do to you. I don't know if they kick you off or not, but I'd be interested to find out whether or not that's true. But, Mitch McConnell, certainly Devin Nunes is a serious danger in all of this. And Kevin McCarthy has been demonstrably quick to sell out on this. In 2016, he was worried about Trump being paid by Putin. By 2018, he can't wait. Keep paying him. I love this guy. He's fantastic. And in fact, can I get some of that sweet lucre while we're at it? He may be asking. I don't know. I'm just saying that it brings me no confidence at all to say that senior FBI and CIA officials briefed congressional leaders on these issues. Not only do I think, like Mitch McConnell, they'll do nothing on purpose, but I think that there are other operatives like Devin Nunes who might very well say, thanks for telling me what you're doing to defeat Russian interests in this. I can't wait to tell the Russians so that they can avoid your efforts to stop them, and they can feed me and the Republicans that information, and we can use it to consolidate more power. This is how far gone I think things actually are. We're required by law to brief the Russians on counterintelligence operations. That seems pretty sad, and it seems like the sort of vulnerability that Russian trolls among their government would be only too happy to exploit. It's just extra fun for them. Not only do we win the intelligence war, but there's nothing quite like using American transparency laws, if you can even call intelligence sharing with Congress a transparency law. But to use the statutory requirement that they brief the Republican leadership, who are in cooperation with us because we've made it in their interest to be in cooperation with us, is fantastic. You couldn't ask for better. You're not going to get that out of Russia. So, okay, we've concluded this article. We've made it ever more conspiratorial in nature. But I wanted to throw this out here, and I'm going to transition back to the other article by reading Mike Musson's comment here. He was asking about the previous article in the AP article about turning out non-voters. In other words, Trump is depending on unlikely voters. Yes, that is absolutely the case. And it's what Dominic Cummings did with the Brexit vote. And it worked. And it might have been lightning striking and will never work again. I don't know. It may work forever. I mean, technically speaking, numerically speaking, again, if we have only 50% voter participation here, 50% turnout of registered voters in this country, you could target registered voters who haven't cast votes before in a long time. Those are unlikely voters, but they're not nearly as unlikely as people who haven't even bothered to register. And if registration rates are anything like participation rates, I don't actually know offhand what registration rates are. I assume that we're rather more registered than non-registered, just because it's an easy thing to do. And I think everybody starts out with the intention of voting, or at least starts out with the interest in saying, well, if I change my mind and I decide I'm the kind of person who will vote, I know it'll be a problem if I don't register now, so I'll go ahead and do it. Someone's offering me a voter registration. I'll take it. Motor voter may have had something to do with that. I don't know. Probably that was the design of it. But anyway, if 50% of people who are registered still don't turn out to vote, and there's some significant percentage of people who would otherwise be eligible to vote if only they would register, that would suggest that if you can capture the majority of those folks, or even a large majority of those folks, because they do hit your sweet spot, disengaged, probably less educated. I love uneducated voters, right? I think that probably overlaps a lot, and you may be able to exploit that. But one of the other problems that comes with it is this terminology, this confusing terminology hints at this, I think. Are we talking about eligible voters? Are we talking about registered voters? Are we talking about people who are eligible because of their registration, or eligible because of their age and citizenship? That makes a difference. And the fact that they are unlikely voters, and as it's described in the story, the AP story, or is it described in the AP story, or it might have been our discussion of the AP story? The idea, we were talking about voter screens. But there was something in here about how traditionally we predict who will vote by looking at who has voted. I know that was mentioned in here somewhere. I don't remember exactly how they put it, and I don't know if it's necessarily worth finding how they did it. But the general gist of the idea was, historically, we've been able to predict who will vote. Pollsters do this. And we'll be able to predict who will vote by looking at who has voted in the past. If your voting record is spotty or non-existent, or you're not even registered, they're just that, pollsters just view that as it's no way that person's going to vote. It's really just almost not even worth asking them how they would vote, even if they were registered. 'Cause who cares? They're just not going to. And sometimes you get different results, sometimes vastly different results, as between asking general population, who would you vote for if the election were held today, and asking likely voters, people who are registered and haven't missed an election in the past 5 years. You'll get different results. And, well, if it turns out that on the poll that counts, election day, you get different results because different people show up, you're going to find yourself being surprised. The question is, why will you be surprised? And how surprised should you be? Here's what I mean. Historically, as I said, we've predicted who will vote by looking at who has voted in the past. Now, if that model is thrown out the window, either because you're doing things the Dominic Cummings way, or because whatever, the Trump variant of it. Well, we're motivating people to get registered and come out to vote. If that model is thrown out the window, this creates a lot of uncertainty. It means your polling is in jeopardy of being inaccurate in the end, or will look like it was inaccurate. Your polling was fine. You, I'm sure, predicted with reasonable accuracy what your universe of likely voters ended up doing. The question is, how do you predict unlikely voters? And there's no model for that. But in addition to there being no model for it and therefore becoming surprising, it is, I guess, in the end, indistinguishable. And maybe we can put our minds to figuring out how you could distinguish such a thing, because we'll need to investigate this eventually. But that turnout of political unicorns is indistinguishable from inexplicable magic in many ways. There's a great quote out there that one of my friends used in the high school yearbook about that any technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic. I don't know if I've mangled the quote too badly, but apparently quite famous among some people anyway. Might be new to others. Sounded pretty interesting and fun and new to me when I first heard it. But in a similar way, if the model of likely voters, and it doesn't have to be likely voters, but if any model that you've been using for scientific prediction or pseudo-scientific or semi-scientific, quasi-scientific, I mean, it is scientific what polling does, but some people don't think of it that way. But if you've been using this kind of model, any kind of model for scientific prediction, and then you change all the assumptions. I mean, the scientists will tell you it's not that science can't predict this. It's that you've assumed a certain set of facts, and maybe they were the wrong set. And given the right set, you can do the prediction right because the science is sound. But if the model gets thrown out the window, it not only will result in a big surprise, but it creates a window for mischief. And I bring that up alongside the Yahoo News story about these increased surveillance or increased intelligence abilities among the Russians, and our concerns over them. And, of course, the fact that we're briefing Republican politicians whose interests overlap, unfortunately, with the Russians in this, and that we have to do so by law, and we keep giving them a roadmap to what we're doing about it. And we're already dealing with a situation where we believe, if it wasn't for the fact that we didn't already have reason to believe, and a large cohort of people in this country who do believe, that the Russians did, in fact, materially interfere with the 2016 election, this would be crazy. But we do have that, and so therefore we have to consider whether or not a result that shatters all previous models and therefore all previous scientific understanding of elections and how they work. I say scientific in the sense that they're based on real events and data and real observations that have been consistent for decades up until poof, just this weird, strange moment where all of a sudden everything you've known forever about elections and how they work, as unlikely as it seemed to be true, and so many people are constantly frustrated by polling. How could you possibly know? You called it, 1,500 people, 3,000 people. That's a minuscule number compared to the number who are eligible to vote and who will come out and vote. How can you possibly know with that much certainty? Well, it's mathematics. It's science. This is how it works. Well, then how come you got this wrong? Well, there are many reasons why polling can't be a perfect predictor, and one of them is it doesn't predict things that aren't contemplated by the model. But other things that aren't contemplated by the model are outright cheating. And if you are headed into the election by saying, look, it's been our strategy, and it's always been our strategy, to bring out people that the model doesn't contemplate, and that with people about whom all scientific methodology available to us says they don't vote, they won't vote. It doesn't matter what message you give them, they just don't. For decades, they haven't come out. There have been different messages and different messengers over those decades. There's just nothing that moves them. Of course, all of that campaigning was done within certain bounds previously, i.e. not openly campaigning, except for David Duke, as a Klansman, for instance. However, all of those norms, too, have been shattered, and there is, in fact, a cohort of Republican politicians who do campaign this way, and maybe that does motivate these people to come out and vote. But if the model gets thrown out and you can't predict with any confidence, if not certainty, who will and won't vote, then you're also going to have a situation probably in which your result is inexplicable scientifically, and that will lead you to think something's gone wrong here. That something you might believe is Russian interference, and it may have been. Or it could have been the shattering of your model. But I think by now we would have had some data about how badly shattered the model was in 2016 if people thought that it was mathematically possible to explain the result that way. And I don't know. I mean, it's a real puzzle. I guess, like I said, what if you have a surprising result out of the blue like that, especially if you have it again in 2020, when we know, or we think we know, that Russians have been actively involved in manipulating the way Americans approach their elections, at the very least, if not actual vote counts, in 2016. Now being told that they have upped their game and have been penetrating state election systems for a long time, and we keep finding out they have penetrated more and more of them than were originally reported. Do they have the ability? Would they need the ability? Would they dare use the ability, if they did have it, to change vote totals? Don't know. Is it enough to simply say, we have data that we could share with your Republican strategists that suggest that model smashing like this, that norm smashing like this will bring out different people that will help you continue to smash that model? That seems a little bit more likely and a little bit more open to interpretation about how illegal it really is in this country, or how illegal we would consider it to be going forward. And the problem is, at least for less skilled analysts like me, is that you would have a great deal of difficulty, I would predict, in being able to tell the difference between lightning striking again because of model smashing and the kind of recruitment that one side did but the other side purposefully ignored, or just wasn't any good at, or jumped up and down and tore their hair about and pointed at over and over again but just couldn't move their institutions to take seriously. I don't know. How do you tell the difference between that and something more sinister, if it is indeed more sinister, that the Russians have upped their game and have somehow been able to avoid all of our counterintelligence efforts to cut off their ability to either manipulate American voters psychologically or manipulate vote tallies electronically on the other side of the equation, or both. I don't know. So it creates a great problem, doesn't it? And of course, it's not going to get any better for as long as we keep giving away our counterintelligence briefings to people who may or may not simply be turning around and transcribing them out for Russian operatives elsewhere. It's a little bit scary. It's a little bit conspiratorial. It's a little bit of both. And I guess you'll never really be able to tell until the tell-all book is finally published after the election by the New York Times and reviewed in the opinion section thereafter, rather than being reported as hard news. Just to bring that theme back in. All right. Many things to catch up on for tomorrow. We'll give it a shot there. Things will go wild between now and then, I'm sure. We'll be back. And for now, though, time to turn things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with, everything else that we ignored today to focus on the conspiratorial side of things, I guess.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Well, I can tell you they're tapping all the best sources right off the bat on the show to follow. Former Representative and Nixon impeachment investigator Elizabeth Holtzman knows the semantics and substance behind Trump's impeachment investigation. Good thing to start off with there. And then more news from around the world and around the country next with Justice Putnam.